Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at IncWorx Consulting for this, first ever webinar of hopefully a series of webinars. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here with y'all. We're really excited to have you here. Thank you for taking the time to jump in on the conversation today. We are really stoked to talk about mastering application lifecycle management within the Power Platform, and more specifically, using SharePoint as a backend data source and staying within that standard license. This is something that came up very often at the Power Platform Community Conference in Vegas back there in October. And yeah, we wanted to share our findings and our best practices with everyone here. So I'm McCaslin Hughes. Everybody calls me Mac. I am the lead solutions engineer here for the Power Platform with IncWorx Consulting. I'm a father and a husband. That's my beautiful wife, Anna, and our son, Rowan. We live in Raleigh, North Carolina. And throughout the years, the 8 years up into this point, I've worn a lot of hats. I've been an accountant, transitioned from that to SharePoint admin, then dipped my toes in the platform as a Power BI consultant, which opened the door for Power Apps and Power Automate development. And today, now I'm the lead solutions engineer for IncWorx. And in my free time, outside of spending time with my family, I like to play tennis and snowboard, read, and do some biking. So all fun stuff, but we'll move on. So today's agenda, what we're going to be covering today, starting off at the high level, is going to be just an overview of ALM and what does application lifecycle management look like in the Power Platform with SharePoint. We're just going to give a high-level breakdown of ALM, and then we'll dive right into the demo. We're going to get our hands dirty, and we're going to start playing with some stuff. So we'll start with the environment configuration, setting up your dev, test, and prod environments within the Power Platform Admin Center. Then we will look at SharePoint and setting up our sites, our dev, test, prod, SharePoint sites. Then we'll get into the actual solution and flow builds of the webinar today. Now, don't judge me on the flow. This is supposed to be super simple. This isn't a Power Automate lesson. This is a solutions lesson. So the Power Automate flow is going to be real simple, real quick. And then after we've got that all built, we're going to go into deployment and see how we push these solutions we're building from dev into our test and prod environments. And at the very end of that, we'll open up the floor for Q&A. So without further ado, we'll start talking about application lifecycle management. And I'm just going to touch on this briefly. The purpose and benefit of ALM within Power Apps development is really to add security to what you're building for your business and enterprise. It's a layer of security over your development cycle, your source control of the code of the apps and flows that you're building. It's also a layer of security on your business data. You're not messing with production level data when you're building your solutions. You're messing with development data, or you're testing it in your test data center, and it's not impacting production. So at a high level, that's what we're here to solve, is adding that layer of security with ALM and SharePoint. And let's dive right into the demo and see how we do that effectively. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the admin center. So hopefully this looks pretty familiar to everyone on the call. Power Platform Admin Center, where we create and configure all of our environments within the Power Platform. For this demo, we are going to be looking at the standard dev and standard test environments, and I'm going to spin up a new one just on the call here. And we're going to, sometimes it likes to take its sweet time with that prompt, of course, during a demo, but here we're going to try that again. All right, we're going to spin up a new one. This will be our prod environment, standard_prod, just following the name and convention of the other environments that we have set. So when you're building an environment for standard license SharePoint backend, there are some considerations to make. First, we don't want to make this managed. That's going to immediately trigger a premium environment. Everyone in the environment's going to need a premium license. That's not what we're after. So we're going to keep this unchecked. We're going to set our group to none, keep the region your local region. I'm in the US, so I will keep it as US. I keep the get new features early. I turn that off. I keep it turned off. I don't want preview features in my business critical applications that might not work 100% of the time. So I'm going to keep that off. And we're using SharePoint as a backend, but if you're using Dataverse as a backend in a premium type of solution, you would probably want a sandbox environment at some capacity. But SharePoint as a backend, we don't need sandbox environments because all of our data is on SharePoint. So the bells and whistles that come with a sandbox environment, we just don't need. So we would make a production environment. And we will add a Dataverse data store. This is a little strange because it's not premium, but we still need Dataverse. And that is to support our solutions and the solution deployments. They all live in Dataverse tables. They're not premium, they're standard license enabled, but we do need Dataverse when we're turning on our environments. And then next, we will proceed on to the final stage of creating our environment. Keep language and currency to whatever settings make the most sense for you. Our security group, I'm going to go with none and say that's done. What none is, I mean, when selecting none, it just allows anyone in your tenant to be granted a security role within your environment. So anyone could potentially access it if they're granted the right permissions. If you wanted to limit your environments to a specific security group, you could do it within that stage and lock down access. And then there are some other settings here, enable D365, deploy sample apps. We don't need any of that because we're not using any of those features. And I'm not going to spin this up. I'm not going to have everyone wait for a new environment to spin up. We actually have our test environment is going to be configured almost identically to the prod. So instead, we're going to go ahead and look at some settings in our test environment. And so thinking of the test environment, the users that I want in test are going to be one, my developers, who should have environment maker security privileges to build in the environment. I want them to be able to not build, but deploy to our test environment and then share what they've deployed with the UAT group. So that's the first group. The second group are our UAT testers. So I want the UAT testers to have, basic user security privileges to get into our environment, to open the app, to potentially click run on that manually triggered flow. I want that to be granted to my UAT group. And that's really it. It's not the whole company that I want in this environment. And I'm touching there on teams and security roles. And those are very important for an environment. So if we're looking at our environment on this access pane on the right-hand side, we see teams as an option. And Teams is separate than Microsoft Teams, which is, a really great way to get confused. This isn't, a Teams group or anything. This is an environment team. This is how we can leverage our Active AD Active Directory security groups and Microsoft 365 groups, which are already being hopefully actively managed. We can leverage the structure there and assign groups security roles instead of individual users. And so looking in my teams for the standard test environment, I have one here, and I'm just going to go ahead and say edit team. And this is my dev team. So in this group, and before I get to this, so this is my dev team. And I'm assigning a security group. This is, all company dev SG. This is a security group from Active Directory that I'm assigning to this Power Platform team. So this is an Active Directory group, security group. I'm putting it into a team, and that is how we're making that connection from Power Platform to AD. So any member of that security group will be a member of this team, but that doesn't get you all the way there. What you also have to do is manage the security roles for that team. So these are my developers, and I want to assign them environment maker. So selecting environment maker, clicking save. If I'm a member of this Active Directory group and I enter into the Power Platform environment from make.powerapps.com, then I would be at that time provisioned this security role, environment maker, and I'd be able to create something in the environment, which is what I want. This is what I want my makers to have. If I was building for the UAT group, I would assign them basic user security role at this stage. And then one more feature I want to touch on, which is important in the settings, is going to be within features. And right now we're looking at the standard test environment, and this setting applies to this environment as well as the production environment. And what it is, let me actually search for it because it's pretty difficult to find. Unmanaged customization. So it's this block unmanaged customizations, this feature. This is really important to enable in your test and prod environments because you don't want developers to make changes to your apps or flows outside of the dev environment. You want to make sure that everything that's done for development, changes, enhancements, break fixes, is done in your dev and then deployed to your test and prod. And so to make sure that is the case, you turn this setting on for your test and prod environments, so no one can make changes in test and prod. So this is a very helpful feature our team uses frequently. And with that, you have your environment set up. You've created 1 or 2 or 3 teams. You've assigned a teams a security group, or it doesn't even have to be a security group. It could be a Microsoft 365 group too. If you've got an actual Teams team with a Teams chat and channels and all that stuff, you can assign that group to a Power Platform environment team and provision all of those users with a security role. So that could be a really quick way to provision your environments. Or if you don't want to mess with any of that, you could, if you have an all company kind of security group, you could provision it that way. But that settles the environment setup, and now I want us to focus on the SharePoint side of the house. So SharePoint is our backend, and the IncWorx way of doing these deployments with SharePoint as a backend is we set up 3 sites per project. So the project we'll be going over today is a webinar certificate tracker list, which is just a list of certificates, the employees who earned them, the issue and expiry date of that certificate. Very simple. But this is the dev site. So this is dev data for this project, right? And we also have a test site and a prod site. The benefits of having individual sites, these are not teams connected either. These are just teams style sites, but they're not connected to a team. The benefit of this is all of these sites are visible from the SharePoint Admin Center. So that's a big plus for governance. You can see them from SharePoint Admin. That's huge. The second benefit is permissioning these is very simple. It's at the site level. And the best practice for provisioning SharePoint is to do it at as high of a level as you can. If you can provision or set permissions at the site level, that's much better than saying them at the document library level, which is even better than doing it at the list item level. When you're at the list item level, you want to be, rethinking, what are we doing? Is this worth the time? But we're setting these at the site level, which is definitely best practice here. So we've got 3 sites, dev, test, and prod. And my dev and test site, they have the same list, certificate tracker, but my prod site doesn't have that list. And to support ALM, we're going to be using the same list across our environments. We're going to need the same schema no matter what environment or site that we're in. So I need to create the same exact list in my prod site, but I don't want to do it, create new list, add column, make sure the internal names are all the same. I don't want to go through all that. I'm too lazy. So I'm going to go and get into my prod site, select new list, and then I'm going to choose import from existing list. Let that load up, and I'm going to find my dev site. Here's the dev site. There's my list. It's already checked. I'll click next, and that all looks good. I'll create. And this is just going to copy paste the schema right into my production site, which makes deployments and all of this, prep work for ALM a lot more streamlined. It simplifies that process. All right, well, we have our sites, we have our environments. I think we can now get into the build phase of this demo. So ALM requires solutions. So all of our flows and apps, connection references, and environment variables exist within solutions. And a solution, it's really just a folder of objects that can be exported and packaged up into a zip file that we can then send through other environments or stored in our source control. And we want to start by creating a solution. So I'm going to call this solution cert tracker. Something simple. I'll select myself as the publisher and create. And so from the solution, before we even build the flow, and I know we're getting to the flow part. Before we do that, I want to add some objects that my flow and apps will need. And so first things first is I'm going to add a connection reference. And I know that I'm going to be connecting to SharePoint. So I'm going to create a connection reference to SharePoint. I'm going to give it the same name as the solution here. And the connector is SharePoint. I'll use my connection and create. I'm adding this to the solution because it needs it when we add the flow. When we deploy and move this between environments, it's going to need to know what the connection reference is that is being referenced in the flows. And if if the solution doesn't have it, you'll be asked to add it later on. It's better to control it early. And we need another connection reference because we're going to be sending an email. So I'll call this one Outlook Cert Tracker, if I could spell correctly, Cert Tracker. Connector is Outlook email, not tasks. Where is Outlook? And maybe we don't add this and I can show you what it looks like there. Office 365, we're gonna add it. There it is. All right, great. So those are our connection references. Those are the connections we're gonna be using in our flow. And now I want to create our environment variables. So these are going to be our data sources, our SharePoint lists, and they will change when we switch environments. The first value of it is going to be the dev site, and then when we deploy to test, the variable will be updated to our test site. And the way I name these, and the way you have to create them, is you start with the site. And I name them all caps site. This is just how I handle it, so I can see if I have a long list of environment variables, I want to know which ones are sites and which ones are lists or libraries even. But I start with site, then cert tracker, name of the solution. I'll copy this, paste it into the description, maybe change it later. And then we choose a data type. So of all of these, the only data type that's going to be included in the standard license is data source. If you choose any other data type and fill it in, and then use that environment variable in your apps or flows, it's going to trigger premium license requirements. So you don't want to do that. We're going to just choose data source and then SharePoint as our data connector. Parameter type, we're filling in for a site right now. So I'll say site, and now I need to grab the URL of our dev site. So I'll choose that, copy it, enter a new value, paste it, and we'll go ahead and save. So that's our site environment variable. And now that we have the site, we need the list. So I'll give that just a second to load up. There it is. Let's go ahead and create our list environment variable. So all caps list, cert tracker, copy, paste, data type, data source, connector SharePoint, parameter type now is list, and site, we have our cert tracker environment variable site. So we'll just click that, and it's actually going to pull up all the sites it finds in SharePoint within this, or all the lists it finds within that site. There's our certificate tracker list. Go ahead and save that, and we are now ready to start building out our flow. We've got our variables, we have our connection references, they're all inside a solution. So we can start and build a new flow. So I'll select new, go to automation, go to scheduled flow. And I want this flow to be something that, again, this is going to be a bad flow, but every Friday, looks ahead to the next week and finds certificates that are going to expire within the next 7 days and emails the employee that's assigned to that certificate. So if I look back at the list, we have an issue date, an expiry date, an employee column, title of certificate. So yeah, I want to find everything that's going to expire in the next 7 days, and I want to email this person, let them know their cert is about to expire. So I'm going to call this, start off with the name of the solution, cert tracker, and then I'm going to give it like a unique display name, like certs expiring in 7 days. And I want this to run every week on Friday. There we go. This is our scheduled flow setup. Things look all right to me. We'll go ahead and create. And to start, I need to do a get items. I want to do get items to get all of the proper certificates that are coming up to expire. So I'll do get items. And now here is where we start pointing to our environment variables. Instead of finding the list or copy pasting the URL here, we've already done that in the variable. So I need to find it in dynamic content. So I will here search site, and there it is, cert tracker. There's my site. And we do the same thing for the list. I know it pulls up here, but we don't want to select that value because that's the unique name for the certificate tracker list in the dev site. And that's not going to help us when we migrate that, when we deploy this to test or prod. We need to have the environment variable. So again, enter custom value, search for list, And we are going to select cert tracker. And then I just want to add a simple little filter query to get everything that is going to be expiring in the next 7 days. So, expiry date is less than equal to today plus 7 days. So 7 days from now, and is greater than equal to today. So in between today, 7 days from now, get me everything. And then I like to rename my actions. So get items, certs expiring in 7 days, renaming them, but keeping the action name there because that's helpful. At least it's helpful when Power Automate doesn't delete it from me. Try that again. Certs expiring in 7 days. Great. All right. Now I'm going to, like I said, we're going to send an email to the user who is assigned that certificate. So I'll do send an email v2. And in the to line, we'll add our dynamic content, email people. This is going to put it in apply to each. This is where we're getting into the don't judge this flow territory, but making this on the fly. So then we'll fill in our subject. I'm going to try and copy paste this, see if it lets me do that. All right, yeah, it's not too bad. Clean that up a little bit. So we're getting the title of the current item from our apply to each expires on the expiry date of our current item, and we'll give them email body. Cool. That's simple flow. That's it. It's going to get all the certs expiring in 7 days, send them an email. Simple as that. We'll go ahead and save. And, as you're working with Power Automate in the Power Platform, I'm sure you all have had, difficulties here or there. I mean, I experienced like 3 of them just in this demo, flow steps being renamed, actions being difficult to grab. If you find yourself in this state where it's like you can't make any progress on your flow because Power Automate is giving you a lot of hassle, go to your solution, go to your overview, and publish everything. I go to export to publish, and I choose publish from here. The reason I do export and publish is it creates a new item in the history record of this solution. So we'll take a look at that. But if you publish all your changes, it just brings everything to the top. It creates a lot. It reduces the number of items that may be causing you issues. I've noticed this to be immensely helpful when working with child flows, that I can't create the connection to a child flow because Power Automate's not synced up with its changes. It doesn't understand there's a child flow in the solution anymore. So publishing changes or customizations helps tremendously. And I first did the export option, and now we're here. We've published our changes. I want to go to next. And even here, so it pulled different environment, different connection references from within my environment that I didn't want. I wanted it to use the ones from my solution. So for the demo, proceed on, we're going to say add these to our solution. These are just connection references. We can change them later in our actions in the flow, but we wouldn't be able to import the solution without adding them, so we need to add them. So here we can export this as managed or unmanaged. A managed solution is kind of locked down. You can't deploy a managed solution and then make customizations to the objects inside of that solution without creating a solution layer, which is just a whole area we don't want to be getting into. We want to, if we're exporting it as managed, we're saying to ourselves, this is locked in place. We've made the development, we're pushing into test, and we're done developing it in test. If we want to build anymore, we're going to do it in the dev environment. So I'll do this as managed. I'll export it because my intention is to deploy this to test. Before I do that, I want to export it again. And I don't need to publish again because I've already published. And I want to do this as unmanaged. I'm going to bring the version count back to 0.1 because it's the same version, but I'm doing this as unmanaged. And the reason for this is I want to have a version of the solution file that is customizable, that the team can import into another development environment and make changes to if needed. I want to, have this available for continuing source control. Unmanaged, and I'll wait for this unmanaged to export, which hopefully shouldn't take too very long. Sometimes it really likes to take its time on some of these exports here. But there it is. All right. So we have our solution files. They're both the same version, but one is managed, one's unmanaged. And what I'll do from here is I'll, in my dev SharePoint site, I'll have a solutions library. And in this library, I will upload my solutions. So I'll just take both of them, move them in there. And this is my, our team's ongoing source control, for SharePoint, as it were. We can build on this, add more solutions. And if, I have to go to another project and a new developer has to come in here and they want to go back a few steps, this would be how they could do that. And going back to the dev environment, if we look at the history, I can see all the times that this solution has been exported, which is just really helpful to see, how often changes were being made to the solution. So we've built our solution, added our environment variables, connection references. We built our flow. We've tied it into environment variables, and we've exported our solution. The next step is to import it. So I'm going to go to my test environment and deploy my solution into test, and then kick off UAT. So to do that, we go to solutions on the side, select import solution, and we want to always import our managed solutions into test or prod environment. So I'll select the managed, click open, next. And what it's going to ask for me first is to confirm my connection references and the connections it's using to talk to SharePoint and Outlook. And we have a few extras here because it added some in that step when we were exporting. But that's all good. What I like to do here is just check to make sure it's the right account. The connection has a nice green check mark. Everything's looking good. So that sounds great. I will go ahead and next. And now it needs me to tell it what SharePoint site to connect to. So I'm going to grab the URL from my test site and I'm going to import it here. And I'll select my list and I will click import. And this is going to deploy our solution into test. And so once that's deployed in test, you can, if it's an app, you would share your app with your security group that you've shared, that you've granted security roles in your test environment to. Whoever has, part of that security group, whoever has the right security role, you'd share the app with. And if it's a flow, they could, test if the flow has a manually trigger. They could test run it, or they could just go to the SharePoint list and, perform the triggering action that would initiate the flow to run. But that would be where you would start UAT and proceed on from there. And deployments to production are exactly the same. You just select your production environment, you import your solution, and you begin your use of that solution. And so here we can see the solution is imported. We can't edit the objects in the solution, but here are all of our different objects. So that is how we build and export. We saved it to SharePoint. And yeah, that really concludes the demo portion of the presentation. So I'll go ahead and open the floor to any questions or comments or what have you. We can open up the discussion at this point. So does anybody have any follow-up questions? If not, or where'd the presentation go? There we go. Dennis, I see you got your hand up.
Yes. One of the frustrations, I love the presentation you did, because this is something that, I'm definitely doing already with, internally and a lot of the clients that I work with. And one of the biggest frustration when you have the heavy SharePoint standard connector realm of these is now your environment variables. Oh my goodness, the list is just massive on the environment variable front. I've started to do more of instead of choosing the data selection, doing like a JSON and actually putting in the GUID of the SharePoint list or document library to try to cut down on that, meaning, hey, there's one environment variable that is a JSON for that one solution. Because, sometimes you're going to have multiple SharePoint lists maybe a handful of different SharePoint sites within one solution. It's spanning across. And like I said, when you're in one environment, dev, test, and prod for, just about everything, that list gets massive and you're scrolling through it in Power Automate. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Using a JSON to hold on to that versus direct site and list environment variables.
Yeah. So the JSON you're talking about, is that like in a SharePoint list item, that JSON as like a multi-line text field, or is it that's the data type in the environment variable is JSON?
The data type is JSON in the environment variable, and then everything's defined inside of that JSON. I do site, do that, and then I call that out directly from Power Automate. The only advantage that I see with that is on the Power Automate side. Where it falls apart is you can't utilize that on the Canvas app side of the world. So that's like the only downside that I see to that. But I'm trying to, cut down on this massive list, and that was kind of one thought. But again, I hit a wall when it came to, dealing with it in the Canvas app world.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a great solution. So in the Power Automate side, you must be using a premium Power Automate license to get that JSON, because that would it staves those environment variables to Dataverse. So that's why you can't put it in a Power App, because you would trigger a premium license on your app. So
yes, and oftentimes, the quote unquote service account, if it's we'll call it a standalone flow triggering from something else, a user's not necessarily triggering it. A data source is triggering it. Works a little better. You have one service account, you have a premium $15 license, right, for that one service account. Not a big deal, but yeah, it kind of breaks down in the idea that a user is initiating that. Yeah, that user needs that premium, or you triggering it from a Canvas app action, for example, and passing that back into Power Automate. But yeah, the fallback is like what you did, sites underscore, be specific about your naming so you can find it as it starts to build your list.
Yeah, that piece is tricky because the list does get out of hand really quickly.
It does,
but the JSON, I like that approach a lot. And what I've done in the past too is just to have, instead of multiple environment variables to different lists, you could, insert a large quantity of JSON into a SharePoint list and reference that list as the variable, and then pull. I mean, that's all standard license approved. You could, do all that through SharePoint still. Yeah.
Using SharePoint as a quote unquote environment variable repository, and you have one environment variable true in the Power Platform pointing to that one site, that one list, and that list ends up being your environment variable management, right? Yeah. I've done similar things, and actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that probably makes more sense in what I'm dealing with right now. So thank you for that.
Well, and think about the users too. If they need to update the values of those variables in some way, which typically you wouldn't want them to, but if they had to, doing it through JSON in your solution is a lot more complex than doing it from a SharePoint list.
Yeah. And definitely taking the SharePoint list approach when we're talking about, like, let's say department approver, right? I don't want you emailing me to update a certain department and their approver, right? Go to the SharePoint list, update the approvers out there, right? I don't necessarily use those as environment variables, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, keeping it all dynamic and kind of in the business's hands of controlling those types of switches. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Good points. That's great feedback there. That's a great idea. I haven't tried the JSON data source. To go.
But get limited scope, I mean, in terms of, but yeah. Anyways, thank you. It was a great demo. Like, I'm glad somebody actually did this, because Microsoft focuses so much on the premium side, and it cuts out any kind of entry point for small or medium-sized businesses, and heck, even enterprises too. When you say $20 a head or $15 a head times 1,000 licenses, you get very little buy-in from leadership off the bat. Maybe years down the road, we might see the value with Dataverse, but you got to get in the door, and this is a way to get in the door. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you said that. I mean, and so many organizations are building in the default environment, and it's such a big
Yeah,
risk long term.
it
You
is.
know, minor changes can have massive impacts if everything's in default. So, yeah, and it's some organizations are just afraid to create a new environment. They're not sure if it's going to cost them anything, but you know, you're already paying for it essentially. Just turn it on and get going. So, yeah, it's awareness is definitely the big piece.
And loved that, you don't have to go to the extreme of doing a full Azure DevOps pipeline to still stay to stay away from managed environments. It's okay to still do these solution exports, manage that in a document library, because I see folks, they sometimes feel like they need to over engineer it. You don't just put the files in a document library. So I loved that. I love to see that, because I don't see that recommendation a lot. I see a lot of, pro coders, smashing hard into the traditional application lifecycle management. I'm like, I think you're over engineering what we're looking for, so.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and there are so many cool tools available just on like your browser now that can do code review for your solution.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there are just web extensions that you can upload a solution file into, and it'll do like the full
Nice
review. You can put that in
comparison.
your sort. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You don't need to go overboard with it, and
No.
if you're trying to
No.
stay standard, you wouldn't want to anyway. Yeah, well, that's great. Appreciate that. It's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Well, great. Any other thoughts, or I again appreciate everyone taking the time to join our call, and yeah, hopefully this was helpful to everyone. Please reach out with any follow-up questions or any feedback. I think we'll be sending something out following this webinar uh, later on this week, so you can definitely expect to hear from us. But yeah, thank you all again for your time and joining in the discussion. It's been fun putting this all together. So it's great to see and feel the interest. Thank you all. Yeah. All right. Well, yep. There they go. Cool. I think that went pretty well. I don't